Vienna, 1907. Just as the bells of St. Stephen's Cathedral tolled the hour before sunset, Her Highness Princess Helene Barlow slipped through the wrought iron gate of the Schönbrunn Palace's eastern garden, alone but for the man sworn to guard her life. The gravel crunched beneath her boots' black leather, polished, but scuffed at the toes from a morning of pacing. She did not walk like a princess. She moved too fast, shoulders straight, jaw set. There was no lady in waiting trailing behind, no footman to announce her. Just the hiss of wind in the hedgerows and the shadow that moved beside her, tall, silent, armed. "Are you certain, Your Highness?" the man asked. His voice was low, careful. "It's not too late to turn back." Helene stopped. "Don't call me that." A pause. "Yes, ma'am." She turned to him then, her pale blue eyes catching the last of the light. "You know I hate that too." He gave a short nod, then looked out over the frost-brushed lawn. He didn't smile. He didn't soften. But she saw it anyway, the flicker of something held tight behind those dark eyes. "Then what should I call you?" he asked, still watching the trees. "Helene," she said. "Just Helene." Across the lawn, a gardener's boy shouted and was hushed. The sound snapped like a matchstick in the cold air. "Helene," he repeated, and it landed heavy between them. His name was Valentine Boone, 24, Austrian by birth, son of an American merchant who had died in a cholera house near Trieste. He'd joined the palace guard at 17, earned his commission through unrelenting discipline. He didn't drink. He didn't gamble. He could shoot the wings off a goose at 200 paces. And for the past 3 years, he had stood outside her chamber door like a statue, sword at his hip, eyes on the corridor, never her. Not until last week, the day she received the marriage contract. She had known it was coming, of course. The Archduke of Bavaria needed a bride. His first wife had died in childbirth. His second had fled to a convent. He required lineage and obedience, nothing more. Helene was the emperor's niece, 21 and unwed. The match was perfect on paper. But Helene had never been perfect, and she didn't intend to start now. "I'm going to say it tonight," she said quietly. "At the council supper. I'll renounce my claim." Valentine's jaw tightened. "You'll be cast out." "I don't care. They may exile you. Strip your titles. Your inheritance." "I said I don't care." He turned fully to face her then. His uniform was immaculate. Navy wool, silver buttons, red sash. But his gloves were worn at the fingers, and there was a thin scratch on his cheek that hadn't been there yesterday. "They won't let you leave alone," he said. "Not until they've married you off or locked you down." "I won't be alone," she said simply. Valentine's mouth parted slightly. "What are you saying?" She reached into the pocket of her coat and drew out a folded paper. She held it out to him, not quite touching his hand. He hesitated, then took it. Inside was a single sentence. "I trust you. If you help me escape, I will not look back." He folded it again, slowly. "You wrote this before you even asked me. I knew your answer." His fingers flexed. "You shouldn't have." There was a long silence between them. The wind lifted the hem of her coat and tugged at a loose curl behind her ear. "I was your guard," he said. "Sworn to protect you, not to follow you into ruin." "You weren't just my guard," she said. "You're the only one who ever saw me." He looked away, then down. The paper crinkled in his grip. "At last," he said, "there's a train. Leaves just before dawn tomorrow. North, toward Prague. If we make it past the border checkpoint, we'll be out of imperial reach. And if we don't, they'll arrest me. You'll be dragged back. Maybe worse." Helene stepped closer. "Then we make it." Their eyes met. She placed her hand lightly on his arm, fingers brushing the silver braid at his sleeve. It was the first time she had ever touched him outside of ceremony. He didn't move. "I'll be at the chapel gate at 2, she said. "If you're not there, I'll go alone." "I'll be there." That night, the imperial supper was a parade of crystal and candlelight. The emperor sat at the head of the table, flanked by German ministers and Hungarian lords. Helene wore a high-necked silk gown the color of storm clouds. Her hair was pinned with sapphires. She looked every inch the royal bride-to-be. Until she stood. "I cannot accept this engagement," she said, her voice calm but unwavering. "I renounce my position in the line of succession. I release myself from all marital obligations. I resign from court." The hall fell into stunned silence. The emperor's face went white, then red. "This is madness," he roared. "You are bound by blood, by duty. No longer." She turned and walked out. No one followed. At 1:45 in the morning, Helene slipped out of her chambers in a dark wool cloak, boots laced tight. She carried only a satchel, a few coins, and the locket her mother had given her at 13. By 2 o'clock, as the bells rang cold and sharp across the empty palace grounds, she stood by the chapel gate, heart thudding. Valentine was already there. He wore a civilian coat, collar turned up, sword hidden beneath. His cap was gone. He looked nothing like a soldier. Only the way he watched her steady, unswerving, remained the same. "You came," she whispered. "I said I would." He took her hand and didn't let go. They moved fast through the sleeping city. Back alleys, side streets, past shuttered bakeries and frozen fountains. Once, near the Karlsplatz, a patrol passed close, but they ducked behind a hay cart. Valentine held her against his chest, one hand over her mouth, the other on his knife. When the danger passed, he didn't speak, just pulled her along. At the station, the sky had begun to lighten. The platform was nearly empty. A few farmers, a priest, a yawning porter. They boarded the train without incident. In the third-class cabin, Helene sat by the window, her breath clouding the glass. Valentine stood beside her, one hand resting on the seat back, the other near the hilt of his hidden sword. As the train pulled out, she reached up and touched his coat sleeve. "From now on," she said, "we protect each other." He looked down. "I'll never let them take you," he said. The train picked up speed, iron wheels clattering towards a future neither of them could name, but both had chosen. Together, the train rumbled northeast through the Bohemian forest, its steel spine humming against the rails as dawn broke pale over the frost-bitten pines. Inside the compartment, the wooden benches creaked with each turn. The window beside Helene was streaked with condensation, and she leaned her forehead against the glass, watching the tree line blur into silver and green. Valentine had not sat. He stood near the door, arms folded, boots planted wide. His coat was dusted with ash, his collar raised to hide the insignia he had removed somewhere after crossing the Danube. "You haven't slept?" Helene said, without looking at him. There wasn't time. She turned toward him, chin lifted. "You could sit. I won't vanish." He did not move. "I'm listening for accents. If someone boards from Linz or Brno and calls you by title out of habit, we have to act. No one has recognized me since we left the city. That won't last." She studied him a moment. There was a tightness around his mouth that hadn't been there before. Not fear. Something more measured. A kind of vigilance that refused rest. "You've thought this through," she said softly. "I had to." Her eyes drifted down to his hands. He was turning something small between his fingers, a copper coin, worn nearly smooth. "Is that a superstition?" she asked, nodding toward it. He looked down. "No, just a habit." "What's its story?" He studied the coin, then put it away. "It belonged to the smith who hid me when I deserted the infantry. I was 16. He gave me work and didn't ask questions." She blinked. "You deserted?" He glanced at her, uncertain. "You didn't know?" "No. I was conscripted during the Tyrolean unrest. They sent boys with no training into the mountains. After the second week, I buried a friend with my hands. I walked away that night and never went back." She was quiet for a long moment. "And yet you ended up in service to the crown." "I didn't have options. The palace didn't ask where I came from. I kept my head down. I was good at following orders." She tilted her head. "Until me." A faint sound outside interrupted them, the conductor's boots on the corridor boards. Valentine stepped closer to the door, his hand resting lightly near the hidden blade sewn into his coat lining. Helene stood. "Let me speak to him." "No, I'm not afraid." "Doesn't matter." The door slid open, and the conductor peeked in. "Gray cap askew." "Tickets." Helene drew the folded passes from her satchel and handed them over before Valentine could move. The man barely glanced at them, nodded, and closed the door again. After he left, Valentine exhaled, slow and controlled. "Let me carry part of this," she said. "I'm not porcelain." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I know. I don't think you do. I've spent years being managed. Told what to wear, how to smile. I was never allowed to be useful. You were never allowed to be vulnerable, either," he said, quieter now. She looked away, jaw tight. "That's not the same." "No," he agreed. "It's worse." They fell into silence, the train slicing through the countryside. By mid-morning, they reached a small station flanked by rows of timber houses and a chapel with a broken bell tower. Valentine led her off the train without speaking. The platform was empty, save for a woman sweeping ash from a stoop and a boy chasing pigeons with a stick. He guided her down a narrow lane, mud clinging to their boots. A low stone wall emerged behind a thicket, enclosing a cottage with a sagging roof and smoke curling from its chimney. "This is where we wait?" she asked. "For now. I know the man who lives here. He won't ask questions." When they knocked, a stooped figure opened the door broad-shouldered, with a wool cap pulled low. His eyes flicked once to Helene, then to Valentine, and he stepped aside without a word. Inside, the cottage smelled of peat and boiled potatoes. A kettle hissed on the iron stove, and there were 3 chairs around a splintered table. Valentine removed his coat and hung it on a peg. His shirt beneath was plain, sleeves rolled to the elbows, and Helene caught the edge of an old scar along his forearm, long and pale, like a rope burn. The man poured 2 mugs of tea and disappeared into the back room. They were alone again. Helene sat, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic. "What's his name?" "Lucas. He and my father traded iron back when the Empire still allowed foreign contracts." She took a sip. "You speak like a soldier still. Precise. Controlled. That's how I survive." "And if we're not surviving anymore?" she asked. "If we're living now?" He didn't answer. Instead, he sat across from her, elbows on the table. "At the border, they'll ask for documents." She nodded. "I've forged new ones. My name is Lena Bauer now. From Graz." He looked at her, really looked, and something in his face shifted. Not softened, he was not a man who softened, but the guarding relaxed, just slightly. "You're not afraid?" "I am," she said, "but I'm more afraid of going back." The kettle whistled. Neither of them moved. "We'll need to stay here until nightfall," he said. "Then travel by carriage. I've arranged for a driver who knows the woods." "Where will we go?" "There's a convent east of Kutna, Ora. The abbess owes Lucas a favor. From there, we can find work, shelter, names that don't carry weight." She set her cup down. "And after that?" His gaze held hers. "Then we decide what life we want." Outside, wind rattled the shutters. Helene stood and walked to the hearth, where a crooked clock ticked steadily. She touched the mantel with one hand, steadying herself. "I never asked," she said, not turning. "Why did you agree?" Valentine rose. His steps were soundless on the wood floor. "Because I watched you choose your own name," he said. "And I knew no one else ever had." When she turned to face him, the room was quiet except for the clock and the soft hiss of the fire. He stood only a step away. She reached for his hand, and this time, he took hers without hesitation. By dusk, the cottage's warmth had faded into a hush of ash and shadow. Lucas had returned only briefly to light the oil lamp, placing it on the windowsill without saying a word. The wick flickered against the pane, casting a narrow glow across the worn floorboards, and the wool blanket Valentine had folded neatly at the foot of the cot. Helene stood by the basin, sleeves rolled, rinsing the last of the soot from her wrists. The water was cold, and the scent of iron lingered faintly in the air. "Your hands are shaking," Valentine said, adjusting the strap of his canvas satchel. "It'll be colder tonight. You'll need another layer." "There's a shawl in the satchel," she said, drying her fingers on the hem of her underskirt. "Wool, not silk. The abbess will approve." He crossed the room and retrieved it, brushing the fringe clear before draping it over her shoulders. His fingers paused as he adjusted it, careful yet sure. "I asked Lucas to burn the satchel after we leave," he said. "It still carries the palace crest inside the lining." She nodded once. "What's the carriage like?" "2 wheels. Low profile. Covered. The driver's check, but he's been paid well enough not to ask why a woman with your posture isn't where she's meant to be." Helene turned, the shawl drawn tightly around her. "Do I still carry it?" "Every movement," he said. "But it's fading." She sat on the edge of the cot and removed her boots. Her stockings were damp from the thawing path outside, and her toes were pink from cold. "You don't ask what I miss?" she said after a moment. Valentine bent near the hearth, stirring the embers with a blackened poker. "Would you tell me if I did?" "I might." He looked at her, the firelight tracing a dull line along his cheekbone. "Then tell me." She hesitated, toes curling against the rough blanket. The smell of beeswax in the library. The grooved marble step outside the music room. "There's a window in the west corridor that catches the last light of the day. It paints the floor with gold. No one noticed it but me." He studied her face. "You remember quiet things." They were the only things that were mine. He didn't reply. Instead, he moved to the cupboard and took down a tin box. Inside were 2 pieces of dark bread and a sliver of cheese. He handed her one without speaking. Was there ever someone before me? She asked after she'd taken a bite. Before you joined the guard? He leaned against the wall, chewing slowly. A girl in grass. Her father owned his stables. We were both too proud and too poor. What happened? She married a grocer. I enlisted. Helene set her bread aside. Did you love her? I wanted to, he said. But I think I mistook stillness for peace. That's not love. She drew her legs up onto the cot, wrapping the shawl tighter. And now? He didn't answer at first. The silence between them lengthened, not tense, but weighty. Then he crossed the room and crouched beside her, resting one knee to the floor. I've never had to choose someone before, he said. She met his gaze. You have now. Outside, a cart creaked along the lane, then faded. The wind had shifted. Snow would come before dawn. Valentine stood and reached for the small pouch of coins he kept sewn into the lining of his belt. He untied it, counted them silently, then handed half to her. You'll keep these with you at all times. If we're separated, we won't be. If we are, he repeated, you go to the convent. You use the name Lena Bauer. You say your husband died in the spring fever. You do not wait for me. She took the coins but did not nod. I won't wait, she said softly. I'll come find you. He looked at her long, then crossed to the door and checked the latch. At midnight, Lucas returned with the driver, a broad man with a crooked gait and thick gloves worn through at the palms. He grunted once, then turned back toward the lane. The stars overhead were sharp and cold, scattered like salt across the velvet dark. Valentine lifted Helene into the carriage first, then climbed in after her, drawing the canvas flap down behind them. The wheels turned slowly at first, muffled by thawing earth and wet leaves. Neither of them spoke. Only when the last flicker of the cottage light vanished behind the trees did Helene reach for his hand. He didn't startle. He only folded his fingers through hers, palm to palm. They rode through the night. Once, near a bridge of moss-covered stone, the driver slowed, muttering something in Czech. Valentine leaned out, spoke low and clipped, and the carriage moved on. By dawn, they reached the convent, a stone structure half swallowed by ivy, its bell tower dark against the pale horizon. The gates were closed, but a single figure stood waiting in the courtyard, wrapped in a gray habit, hands tucked into her sleeves. Valentine jumped down first, then helped Helene to the ground. Her boots landed softly in the gravel. The abbess approached without speaking. She looked Helene over once, then nodded to Valentine. She may stay, she said, but not as a guest. She'll earn her shelter. She wouldn't want anything else, he replied. The abbess turned and led them toward the door. Before following, Helene looked back. You'll come back for me? She asked. Valentine stepped close, his breath visible in the morning chill. When it's safe, I'll find you. She nodded once, and then she was gone beyond the door, into the stone quiet. Valentine remained until the bell rang for prime, then turned into the forest, footsteps silent against the moss. The convent bell rang in thirds before sunrise, its tone low and deliberate, rippling through the cloister walls like a breath pressed against stone. Helene rose with the others, her hair twisted in a simple coil, her hands raw from the lime soap used to scrub the chapel floors the afternoon before. She moved without hesitation now, through the refectory's narrow corridor, across the cloister walk where frost clung in the creases of the flagstones, into the laundry where steam gathered thick in the air. She spoke little. There was no need. The sisters watched her, but not unkindly. Her posture had softened, her voice quieted. And in this quiet, she had learned the rhythms of secrecy, how to disappear without vanishing, how to be seen without being recognized. By the second week, she had been assigned to the scriptorium. She copied prayers in ink that smelled of bitter resin, her fingers ink-stained and precise. The abbess had handed her a psalter bound in calfskin and nodded once. Your hand is steady, she said. That will serve you. Helene bowed her head. Yes, mother. But it was never the prayer she thought of when her quill moved. It was the sound of boots on wet leaves, the exact weight of a hand closing around hers in the dark. One evening, while the rest of the sisters filed into vespers, Helene remained behind, sweeping the scriptorium floor. The abbess entered without warning, carrying a folded sheet of parchment. There's word from the border, she said. A man matching his description crossed at nightfall 2 days ago. Alone. Helene set the broom aside. Her chest tightened, but she didn't speak. The abbess held out the parchment. He left this with a merchant west of Kutna, Ora. It reached us by courier. The paper was plain, the ink uneven. I am west of the Elbe. You are not forgotten. Helene folded it once and placed it inside her bodice without comment. He will come, the abbess said, voice low. I know. That night, Helene did not sleep. She sat beneath the narrow window in the novice's quarters, wrapped in a wool blanket, watching the moon rise over the frost-laced orchard. The silence was heavy, full of hunger she would not name aloud. By the third week, she was permitted outside the walls under escort. She carried baskets to the nearby hospice, where old women with sunken eyes and trembling hands blessed her with fingers that smelled of rosemary and ash. You've the look of a woman who's given something up, one said, her voice dry as crushed leaves. But your eyes say you're still waiting. Helene pressed her lips together and adjusted the woman's shawl. I gave it up to begin again, she whispered. In the hospice garden, she met a boy selling apples from a sack tied to his back. He offered one without asking for coin. She took it and thanked him. His coat was patched at the elbows. He had his father's boots on the wrong feet. You're the one who came from Vienna, he said. She paused, then nodded once. What else did they say? That you ran from a man with medals and a church full of gold. I ran toward someone, she said. He grinned, gap-toothed and sudden, and ran off without another word. When she returned to the convent, the abbess met her at the gate. There was a man, she said. He waited by the forest edge until dusk, then left. He did not try the gate. He left this. She handed Helene a length of red wool thread, coarse and frayed at the end. Helene closed her hand around it and said nothing. That night, she went to the chapel alone. The lamps were unlit, the air cool with old incense and the smoke of spent candles. She knelt before the altar, not to pray, but to listen. Somewhere in the silence, she imagined the sound of a breath held too long, the way a blade is drawn, not to threaten, but to protect. She waited there until the first bell of lauds. No one disturbed her. At dawn the following day, she was sent to the eastern orchard with a basket for wind-fallen pears. The trees were bare, the ground damp. She moved slowly, skirts heavy with dew. Then she saw him. Valentine stood at the edge of the trees, where the convent walls met the forest. He was thinner, older at the edges, with a coat that no longer bore any mark of rank. His eyes found hers instantly. He didn't speak. She walked to him, the basket slipping from her hand. You shouldn't be here, she said, her voice breaking like thawed river ice. They've stopped looking, he replied. Or they've begun forgetting. She reached for him, both hands flat against his chest, as if to confirm he was real. He didn't move, just closed his hands lightly around her wrists. I found work, he said. A forge 3 villages west. Quiet. No questions. Her breath caught. You came back. I said I would. She leaned her forehead against his collarbone, and he wrapped his arms around her, slow and sure. Neither of them moved for a long time. I have nothing, she said, voice muffled against him. No title, no dowry. I never wanted those. I'm not the girl you guarded. I know. She looked up at him. Then what am I now? He took her face in both hands, his touch rough with weeks of labor, and held her gaze. You're the woman I crossed the empire for. She closed her eyes, and for the first time since leaving Vienna, she let herself breathe without fear. The orchard was empty, but for them. The sky stretched open above the cloister walls, and in the distance, the convent bell began to ring.